All right. So, hey, Joaquina, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Solid. Can't really, complain. Solid, solid as a rock. Who made that song? I don't know. Damn, I don't know who made that song. Was that the Gap Band? Might have been the Gap
Solid
Band.
as a rock. Oh, damn. I don't know who made that song.
It might have been the Gap Band. I feel like it's the Gap Band, but I might be wrong. Uh, but we could look that up later. But okay, so we here to chat, about the concept, beyond the music, the concept and the idea behind infinity, right?
Hmm.
So I just wanted to, sit down with you and chat about it because, you're smart and very thoughtful. Because, smart is cool, but thoughtful on top of smart is even cooler to me. So, I wanted to kind of just, compare and contrast our thoughts and, see if we can, expand our understandings together of, what the hell is infinity. Which actually that reminds me of something I want to ask you about later. But just to begin with, what to you is what is something that is infinite, or what are some things that are infinite in your from your perspective?
I think water is infinite, air is infinite. I think that love is also infinite, and expansiveness as a concept is infinite.
Okay, and what makes those things infinite? Like what does it mean to be infinite?
I feel like it means to be like everything all at once.
Okay.
Like it's ever expanding. There is no beginning, there is no end.
Hmm.
It's interesting to think about, though. I feel like the way infinity has been described to me, it does have a beginning point, but in my mind, it doesn't. To be infinite means that no beginning and no end.
Okay. Yeah, it's like kind of a wild concept to even think about because like, what does that even mean to like have no beginning or no end? Like, what you
Right.
mean? What do you mean by that? Yeah, so for me, it makes me think back to, and every time I think about it, concept of infinity, it makes me think back to like when I was a child. I used to always like, not always, but very frequently feel this sensation, and I can still like feel it. Like when I think about it, I can kind of conjure up the feeling of being very being very similar to like a crumb, like the tiniest thing, but also like a planet or like a star, like the hugest thing you can
Mm,
think of. And like it's a strange feeling because it's like it's one feeling that holds both of those seemingly contradicting things in it. But
hmm.
I don't know, I can that's what infinity feels like to me, right? It's like it's totally encompassing of all levels of existence, right? Of all different degrees of magnitude, or I don't know if magnitude is a word, but if it is, I feel like it's like that kind of like yeah, I guess that's kind of my next question for you is like, if you describe the feeling like in your body, how would you describe that feeling of infinity?
First of all, that was really profound to you for you to feel that as a child. That's really cool. Um, Infinity in my body, it feels like it makes me like it almost is like it makes me feel my energetic body and not my physical body. I don't really think my physical body is infinite, but like inside, it just feels like it's like if this shell was gone, like, and the spirit in me, like, is connected to everything around me. I know this sounds really crazy, but like, it's like, okay, when I talk about, I feel like air is infinite. There's air around me, there's air inside of me. And I feel like for me to feel infinite is when I recognize that the air around me is the air inside of me. Like I am infinite. What is without is within, type of thing.
Yes. So, do you feel like there are any feelings that, first off, it doesn't sound crazy at all? You know, it's life, right? So, what are some feelings that aren't necessarily, or maybe aren't completely infinity feeling, but might be maybe complementary to it? Feelings that you feel like, walk up to it, or edge upon what infinity feels like.
Whew. Hmm. At the edge of infinity. Um, I don't like, honestly, thinking about that question almost makes me sad. Something inside of me is
Uh,
I don't know. It feels like, to me, it feels like the same thing when it's like untapped potential. Like when you know that you could be so great at whatever greatness looks like for you, but you're not. And you always come really close, and then something happens. And you never realize this thing that you know you're supposed to experience.
okay, yeah, that's fair. I've heard of it makes me think of that makes me think of the concept of like the dark night of the soul, where it's like, and which is a thing that I've experienced, and I'm sure you've experienced, where it's like, oh, like this is a deep, like kind of spiritual, like yearning for something that
Yeah.
isn't quite, or at least from my perspective, isn't quite in existence or isn't part of my reality
Mm-hmm.
right now. But I know it exists. Like I know it's there, but I can't quite like I don't feel like I have access to it right now. And
Yeah.
I get that. For me, it feels like as far as like actual like, let me take a second. Hold on. So for me, when I think of like feelings that creep up upon the feeling of infinity, when I first asked that, in my head it popped up. I was like, love, the feeling of love. It feels like the like pure love. It
Mm-hmm.
feels like infinite. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's true, but then I start to think about other emotions like hatred and like sadness
Mm-hmm.
and like maybe envy or joy or whatever the case may be. And I realized like, oh wait, no, those things are also or can also be infinite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was sharing with you earlier about a little bit of, drama going on. And I'm like, oh yeah, that like, going on in my personal life. And I'm like, oh yeah, that drama, that energy that I tend to receive from that particular person, it seems like it's an infinite degree of like like hatred there, and it's just like it's like
Yeah.
a ever giving supply, an ever rejuvenating supply of like hatred and like
Mm-hmm.
nastiness, which leads me to the thing I was mentioning that I wanted to get back to earlier, the concept of like hell, because they say, based off of, most depictions of what hell is, right? Depending on, very, very different religions or faiths or whatever, the concept of hell is very often associated with it being everlasting or eternal, right? Eternal flame, right? And I think that if infinity encapsulates everything, then it encapsulates everything, right? Like a lot of times we want to or we tend to maybe associate it to the more positive things because of our
Mm-hmm.
particular perspective. But I know that often, you know, people also often associate infinity with, suffering, and I know that a lot of times when folks may be experiencing, depression, that can look like, or that can feel like and look like them being like, oh, this sadness is forever, like that is just part of who I
Yeah.
am, of what my experience is. So I guess my I guess I don't have a particular question about that, but I love to hear your thoughts.
No, that's really interesting because, like, the first question you asked me of what I would associate as being infinite, and I said love, my mind thought about hate too, but I didn't say it out loud.
Hmm.
But it is interesting that we tend to relate positive things with infinity, but there is also, yeah, there's also the shadow. The day is infinite and the night is infinite. But I feel like, okay, follow me.
I'm right here.
I feel like all of these things are infinite, but all of these things are happening or accessible at once.
Hmm.
So while someone going through a episode of depression, it feels infinite. And it could be. They could live their life in that.
Hmm.
There's also tools for them to step out of that and tap into infinite joy.
Hmm.
Like, I feel like they're all accessible all at the same time and they're all infinite.
Sorry, I'm listening. I just got the low battery thing on my computer. Shoulda plugged
It's
that up,
okay.
Shreddy. All right, there we go.
It's okay.
It
I
wasn't
had
far
to
away.
pull out my extension cord.
All right, bet. Can you? Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is like we have the capacity to alter what aspect of the infinite we actually are tapping into. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I feel like that's a very powerful thing, right?
Yeah.
Because if infinity encapsulates everything, and these things like emotions and thoughts and uh, I guess episodes, of depression or, for lack of better words, episodes, quote unquote, of joy or whatever,
Mhm.
are alterable, and we have the capacity to change the trajectory of like what our day is or what our life is, then it also sounds like we are, the concept of us being co-creators of our reality, right?
Yes.
And it's like, well, that's like God body movement, right? Like it's not necessarily, you know, I am God, like the all powerful God, or you are the all powerful God. But most, faiths will say that we are reflections, right?
Yeah.
Made in the image of, right? And
Mhm.
I believe, and my Bible isn't as strong as it could be, but I'm fairly certain there's a passage in the Bible where Jesus is saying like ye are gods, right? Or something along those lines. And I'm like, well, if we're to take that in the context of this conversation, then it feels like to me like we have we're able to tap into, we're gifted with the ability to tap into um God, like, you know abilities, in the sense that, like I'm not the reason why human beings are able to produce other human beings, right? I'm not the reason why, if you plant a seed in the right conditions, you're able to grow some fruit or vegetables from it, right? But you and I both contain, the capacity to plant a seed into the ground. And,
Yeah.
I don't, I don't know like your business as far as like reproductivity and whatnot, but it's not it's not necessarily unlikely or to my knowledge impossible for either of us to play a part in a human being being born, right?
Mhm.
Or human beings in general, right? Like generally speaking, we're capable of playing a part in this creation, right? This bringing
Mhm.
about of life, right?
Mhm.
Now we're not doing it from scratch, but I think that is like us tapping into the infinite, right? Where as
Yeah.
human beings we're able to tap into the void of, the concept. And like I think about the concept of like, oh, like a womb, tends to take on
Mm-hmm.
a circular shape, like a zero, right? And that zero
Mm-hmm.
is what I associate. I associate zero with like the void, right? Zero isn't nothingness. It's the capacity for everything. It's what do they call it? Uh, like I'm forgetting the word. Maybe like antimatter, or I'm forgetting my word right now. But out of the quote unquote nothingness is where everything springs, right?
Yeah.
But for me, that just means like, oh yeah, nothingness isn't nothingness. Zero and nothingness is the possibility, is the capacity for everything, the potential.
Yeah. And like, it also makes me think about when you say that and you speak on nothingness and speak on zero, it's like the beginning point, and that's terrifying for a lot of people.
Yeah,
The endless possibilities is really terrifying and overwhelming sometimes and almost paralyzing, which is why I feel like some people can get stuck there.
yeah.
It's like I can do everything.
So now what?
like,
Yeah,
like what? Yeah.
yeah. I dig it, and I mean, that's why like also when you look at it, it's like it's all about perspective, right? Because you could look at it like, damn, like I could do anything. That's overwhelming. What the fuck? Like
Yeah.
that's too much. That's way too much for me to have access to. And it actually it makes me think about Aquila and the Bee. You know that quote? It is I'm going to paraphrase, but something along the lines is like, we are not most afraid of. We're not afraid of that we are inadequate. We are afraid that we are powerful beyond means, or something like that. And I feel
Yeah.
like, and I personally have definitely felt that. Like it took me a while when that movie first came out when I was a kid. I didn't really get that, but as I got
Yeah.
older and started reflecting on it, I'm like, oh well, my understanding of that is like, oh yeah, because I could possibly do anything, or because my impact could be so like magnanimous, it makes me kind of worried, like damn, I don't want to mess up. Like I don't want to mess up my life, someone else's life, or a lot
Yeah.
of times you don't want to mess up someone's day. But that's kind of how I look at it, like because you're so powerful, if you're not if you're not intentional, then you might, you know really cause some havoc, right? Cause some chaos.
That is true. You can tap into, like, you can ruin up someone else's infinity. Like,
Right.
at the day, yeah, that is true. And I feel like for me, it was like I get overwhelmed with options. And it's like, which one should I start first? I'll do all of them. And now I'm doing too much. Like,
Right.
I get myself tied in. It's like this loop. So, endless possibilities used to get me stuck because I never knew where to start, I guess. But now I just start.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and I think that that comes to like knowing yourself, because I got children, right? And like my eldest is more like, oh, I could do everything. I'm gonna damn near go do everything. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go do that before I finish going and do that. So for him, a lot of times the lesson that I need to like remind him of is like, oh, you need to like maybe slow down so that you can focus on whichever thing that you're doing and like really do it, as opposed to bouncing around so much, right? Like you can bounce around kind of intentionally, but you can also bounce around very unintentionally, like leaving things out. Like for
mhm,
specifically because he's a child, right? He's a very small
mhm.
child. It's like, oh, you want to go play with that, but you just left all of those toys out that you were just playing with. You need to go put that up before you do that. Or you told me you wanted to
Wow.
do this, and I
Yeah.
set you up for this, but you did it for like half a second before you got distracted by that. Like, no, let's spend some time with these things that you say you want to do. But then for my second eldest, or my middle, or whatever, um, she's much different. She's more like, oh, all of these options, all of this energy that I'm getting right now is too much. It's too much going on. Y'all need to chill. But it's interesting because for her, it's
I really
also
with her.
a lot of time, right? Because also a lot of times for her, the option, the remedy is also to slow down. It's also like, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times it's not necessarily her slowing down. It's her slowing down what she's receiving, her making her environment kind of slow down as far as her sensory input, so she doesn't get like overwhelmed. Because for her, all of these options might make her go like, I'm just gonna sit here for a second. And for me, because I'm not necessarily that way, I have to be reminded by my partner a lot, like, oh no, you gotta address that. You gotta address the fact that this is sensory over. So it's like a thing that I'm learning to work with. Like as the parent,
Mm-hmm.
like I gotta recognize, like, oh yeah, she's more likely to need to take away all of these inputs so that she can actually, move forward. And keep in mind that my son is kind of the opposite.
Honestly, though, like you describing that made me think about God or whatever people would label that entity, right? When we talk about co creating and this infinite being that created everything, I think that that being looks at us that way. And like, this child just needs to slow down. Like, this child needs to slow down, but in a different way. Like, I don't know, just when you were describing that, I was like, wow, that sounds like a very godly perspective if you were to zoom out into the whole picture of everything.
And I think that, like, for kids, it can feel like simpler, or maybe it is like simpler because you don't have as many things piled on top of them. Like they don't have as much baggage coming along, so it can be maybe simpler or easier to see because
Mm-hmm.
they're more like, I don't want to say they're simpler creatures, but they're less. They just have less things piled onto them, right? Because you and
Mm-hmm.
I as adults, we have the things from when we were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to our current age, while they have the things from, maybe their past lives, possibly, past existences, and their nature of what they came out for whatever reason, and their years on this earth. But we have all of that plus all these years and all this like baggage and all these different things that we have. So it's like for them, it seems like they're like it's easier for me. I guess another part of it is not just because they're younger. It's because they're younger and Zoom, get out of my face. We got 10 minutes, then we can hop off and hop back on.
Okay.
But for them, it's like they're simpler in certain ways, but also they have, if they're, fortunate, they have someone who's older that's paying a lot of attention to them, that has like life experience to work off of, to kind of help them kind of, you know, address whatever that particular thing is. But you and I, we may also have that, right? Like we may have like elders or even friends that might not be elders that help us see it, but it's not necessarily their duty, right? Like as a parent, like it's my duty to like pay close
Mm-hmm.
attention to these kids and try to figure out how to
Mm-hmm.
help them do what they need to do. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I say all of that to say like it gets complex and it gets harder, and like your reliance on God, uh and your reliance on, you know, whatever higher force that you may tap into, it becomes, or at least for me, it feels like it becomes that much more crucial, because at a certain point, typically, the typical run of things is that, our elders or the people who are best equipped to kind of help guide us, they pass before us. Like at some point, you know, we're gonna, or at a lot of points, the more adult we are, we're gonna have to make a lot of decisions without necessarily the input of someone else, without someone who's older and probably wiser to help. So that older, wiser presence can often look like, oh, God
Mm-hmm.
or religion or whatever, or
Mm-hmm.
spirituality.
Mm-hmm. I have more thoughts to say. Did you want to get off and get back on, or wait,
Um,
keep going?
Let's do it. We got like 8 minutes, so let's do that, and then
Okay.
just in a few minutes we got back on.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It like spirituality, and I know for me, like I've also been um really connected to my ancestors and being guided and loved on by them. And it's like, it feels like it just feels necessary. Like it feels so necessary for me anyways. Like you said, like my spirituality was always a big part of my life, but like the older I get, the more it's like I need these things, these beings to hold my hand, because this is very overwhelming. It gets very overstimulating. I don't know what to pay attention to. There's so much to create. There's so much that's being destroyed because we have the inverse of infinity. And to stay grounded and to stay centered, there is God, there is my ancestors. And yeah. So yeah. So everything you said just like really resonates. And like, because wading through infinity it can be so beautiful, but it's also it's really good music, and it's also a lot of noise. All
Yeah.
of these things coexist, and we live in a world where all of these things will continue to coexist. And so how do we make sure that we're navigating the infinite in a way that best serves us and edifies us
Yeah.
and the people around us?
Yeah, and you're making me think when you mention ancestors, it's like, oh well, we have different ancestors, right? Like some of our ancestors might be more adept at this sort of issue. Some of them are more
Mm-hmm.
adept at this sort of issue, and you might need to, get in tune with them. In some situations you might get in tune with your more money wise ancestors. In some situations you might get more in tune with your warrior ancestors. In some situations you might need to
Mm-hmm.
get more in tune with your I don't know, maybe your even like your musical ancestors, right? Depending on what the situation
Mm-hmm.
is, right? So I think that that's another that's a whole other like conversation to tap into, right? Because if you think about infinity, well, we we go back, right? As far as like you and I, in order for us to get here, it was a whole lot of people before us, right? like,
Yeah.
like eventually we get back to the first being, right? Or the first
Yeah.
beings, or whatever, however that works out, right? So, in a way, that's a form of infinity.
Mm. Yeah. It is. Human like human life and the passing of and the birthing of, yeah, and our lineages and our ancestors. And I also, it's like, it's not that, okay, so I'm gonna say the statement, then unpack it. Like, it's like I lean on them because they've walked through the infinite before. They've had this human experience, and they've crossed over, and they have a perspective that I don't have. And so I lean into the infinite of my bloodline
Mm,
to say, how do I approach this situation? You know?
yeah. Okay. So another thing I wanted to kind of ask you about is in relation to infinity. What is your what is your relationship to limitation?
Felt my anxiety peak when you asked me that. Um, Honestly, like I guess that's kind of where my mind went when you asked about like approaching it, because I just thought about like it just made me think about like not being able to grasp it, right? And so it's like, what are my thoughts on limitations? It's interesting because I do believe infinity exists, but I believe that limitations are real, but they're not.
Okay.
I believe that if I'm trying to word this in a way, because I definitely don't believe in like spiritual bypassing or ignoring things and they go away. No, but I do believe that limitation is me like believing a lie, something that isn't real, but I believe that it's real. So, for example, if I believe that I don't have the tools to publish a book, I'll never start the process. Mm-hmm. And if I never start the process, I'll never see how easy it is to self-publish. If I never start the process, I'll never see like what it takes to market and sell. Like I'll never be able to taste authorship. That does not mean that it was not accessible to me. Mm-hmm. It just means that I had this really deep core belief that was deep rooted somewhere that told me there's a door here. And even when like, and it's because of my life circumstances that make it seem real. Mm-hmm. Like, of course I can. They'll never notice my book. I don't have the funding to publish. Like all of these things would seem very real until I just decide to step into the limitless and start the process and allow it to unfold.
Right. Yeah. You're making me think of like the concept of manifestation. So it's like, I believe in manifestation, but in the sense that manifestation is what you have access to plus what you do with what you have access to. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like I believe that like like for some people, in order to have the life that they want, they have the things at their disposal that they could build that life with, and they have to just apply the effort, and keep showing up. Like you were mentioning, like, oh, if you don't try to do it, then how you gonna do it, right? And they have to just keep showing up and showing up and showing up in order to achieve it. But also, for other people, because of their particular life circumstance of what they were born into, there are some things that in their lifetime will not become a reality for them, even if they do show up and show up and show up. And a lot of times that's really like that goes into our co-creating, because it's like, yeah, I may be able to manifest X, Y, and Z given the proper foundation, but because of my fellow co-creators that were here before me and are here now, I might end up, and I guess maybe it's a trigger warning moment, but I could have been a child that died in the hospital, and that's not the child manifesting their own death, right? It's us as co-creators, that child ends up, for whatever reason, be it, just how that child's parents, health was based off of what they were born into and what they manifested, or based off of how that child was cared for when they were born, based off of, all these other co-creators that were around them when they were born, right? And another example, right, a child that is born, so two children can be born into the same household, but these children have different natures when they come out. These children don't necessarily even have the same parents, even if they literally have the same biological parents. They can have totally different relationships with those parents.
Yep.
And that will influence them along with their own nature, to become different people and do different things based off of their relationships, right? So it's like, yes, manifestation from my perspective is real, but it's not, anybody has access to any degree of manifestation, because that's simply not true, right? like for most of us on this planet, even if every single one of us on this planet decided wholeheartedly and put all of our efforts into, I'm gonna become a billionaire, it's not gonna happen for the vast majority of us, right? And that's simply because we're co-creators, right? And also, of course, billionaires only exist because of exploitation of the masses, right? But for any particular thing, right, if all of us decide that we want it to grow to be 7 feet tall, it's not gonna happen for everyone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what, honestly though, it's like I feel like in infant, like that also makes me think in the infinite, what am I trying to say? I feel like there are things that we want to create that I always try to keep the perspective of I might not see it in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what the infinite is. The infinite goes way beyond me.
Right.
And so it's like I might not realize it, but my lineage will,
Mm-hmm.
my people will, my blood will.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm the first domino, maybe I'm the second domino. Like, but we're in this like bigger picture of things.
Right, you on your Tupac. I might not change the world, but I guarantee I'm inspired the mind that do. Nah, but for real, I feel it. I feel it.
Oh my God. But yeah, no, I feel you though, because, and that's why I say like, I tread very lightly because I do not subscribe to these people who, or the belief of spiritual bypassing and ignoring very real circumstances. You know what I mean? It's like you can't dress up poverty and make it pretty or like anything that like holds us. But at the same time, I do believe in an infinite perspective that a lot is accessible to us, even if we won't see it in our lifetime. Even like our ancestors that fought for freedom, that never experienced freedom, that always experienced being slaves or whatever our ancestry is. Right. It's like, but we did, you know?
Yeah, yeah. That it's you're making me want to like offer another like example of like, because a lot of okay, so two things. I don't want to lose these thoughts. One, when it comes to the fact that there are limitations on my life, right? On me personally, I have some limitations on my life, right? Like I am not gonna be 7 feet tall in this lifetime, unless there's some magical surgery that for some reason at some point I decide I want that and I do it. It's just not gonna happen for me, right? So that's a kind of extreme example, maybe a kind of silly example, but what I tried to do, what the thing that I've come to terms, I've come to work at is like, oh, let me just pray for and try to keep my antennas up for making sure that I am doing what is meant for me, what is the most healthy, happy, and whole path that's accessible to me in this lifetime, right? And I just want to make sure that that's what I'm going for. I'm going for what's for me and not just what is something to be desired, something that's for me, right?
Yeah.
And again, that can change depending on actions I take, depending on, things I experience, people I experience. But I just want to make sure that on any given day and any given moment, the trajectory I'm going for is what's for me. And for me, going back to the idea of infinite, a lot of times what I go off of is like the things that I can't shake, right? So like I've shared with you that like, oh, I do I do some, I'm not gonna say exactly what I do like for work, but like some sort of technical work or whatever, right? But when I first started like getting into that, I kind of was digging it, and I was like, I might be down to just like do this, and like I won't even necessarily, I might not need to even like pursue being a musician and living off of my music, right? I might be able to just be happy just making the music and chilling and not necessarily pursuing doing it as a career. And I thought that when I like first got down, I was like, that might be fine. I might be good with that. Like, but when I said that to myself, I think it unlocked like me accepting that possibility as opposed to clinging so tight to no, I have to be a musician, I have to live off being a musician. I think when I accepted that as, oh, if that's not actually for me and for my best path, then cool, it's fine. But when I accepted that, that's when like it became very clear to me, like it became in a renewed way clear to me, like, oh no, like this is not leaving you. This desire to be able to live your life in this way is not going anywhere. Like if even if I didn't hold on to it tightly, it's still in me because I just love music so much, right? I love creating it, I love performing it, I love like learning about it and listening to it, seeing other people learn about it, listen to teaching people, like teaching my kids like the basics of chords and like guitars and like all of that, right? So it's like, oh no, this ain't, they say it's not on me, it's in me, right? So I'm like, oh well, based off all the things that I've received, all the messages I've received, I'm like, oh yeah, I feel like this is for me. So it's like we can maybe look back on this in like a couple years and be like, oh well, I guess he was right. Or like when I die, it might be like, oh, I guess he was wrong. But I don't think so. I think we're gonna look
I
back
don't
and be
think
like,
you're
oh,
wrong at
I
all.
guess he was right. I guess he was right. you know?
You know what? Also, that makes me think like I I think that attachments are limitations.
Mm,
Because even like, and it's literally attachments of any kind, because yes, that is for you, that's an alignment with who you are, but you can't even grow attached to that. It wasn't until you let go, and like, I feel like infinity only exists in freedom. We cannot, you can't grasp onto the infinite. You can't grasp water. You can't reach out and grasp and feel air. Like
yeah.
things that are infinite, you can't really hold on to. And I feel like that's why a lot of belief systems are like, non-attachment,
Hmm.
like lose attachment to these things. Even when the concept of fasting is to lose attachment and other reasons. But yeah, that's what made me think of it, is like attachment being a form of limitation.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I could see that for sure because a lot of times when you're so, and I've experienced this, I experience this still, like it's not a past tense things, but sometimes I'll realize like, oh, I was so focused on it looking this way that I didn't even realize like, no, it could look this way, it could look that way, it could look that way, it could be all these different things, but
Yeah.
I'm not peeping because I'm being so myopic and only looking at this one way of it being.
Mm, that's so true. And I feel like yeah, I feel like I've experienced that when it comes to love in any capacity, romantic, friendship, and familial, actually, of like, I always, and don't get me wrong, I had my traumas, right? But I always looked at it as like I lacked so much love because I was so attached to how I thought every relationship and dynamic around me was supposed to look like.
Hmm.
And then it wasn't until I released that, learned the concept of grace, and where I began to see where it was and accept where it was and where it wasn't,
Hmm.
just to be frank. So yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like, so you just made me think of, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think we can complete this conversation. Honestly, I don't think we can complete this conversation. Period. Like end of sentence. Because we're talking about infinity, but
Yeah.
I especially think that we would be at least somewhat out of pocket to end this conversation or to wrap this part of this conversation up without speaking more explicitly about the concept of scarcity,
Mm,
right? Because we talked about limitation, and scarcity is a form of limitation, but scarcity is like kind of a particular thing when you think about it, right? Right, and you were saying, you were talking about like knowing where love is, and so many of us, because of our experiences, operate from a place of thinking that love is a scarce resource, right?
hmm
And even like so many of us, if not explicitly, implicitly think that well-being is a scarce resource, right?
Yeah.
The ability to live well, and and that's for good reason, right? Because we've been indoctrinated into it, right? With so many, in this capitalistic world, it's like, oh, we've been taught, one way or another that like, oh, there's got to be winners and losers. It's got to be that way, right? And like, life isn't a game of, I don't know, spades, right? Like, it's not a game of spades, right? It's a planet where like the money doesn't create the fruit, right? The money didn't create these seeds. So like, when it comes to literal like well-being and like food and whatnot, there's no scarcity when it comes to actual food. And that's what these damn eugenicists and that's a whole nother thing. But these people want to convince us that there's that overpopulation is a real thing, right? When no, that's not actually what's happening. What's happening is that you motherfuckers are hogging the resources so that
Yeah.
these people don't have what they need when they very, very much so could.
Yeah, agreed. Hogging the resources and keeping them in centralized hubs so people flock to these places when there is definitely more earth to live on.
So much
There's
earth.
more land. That is so true. And yeah, something you were saying also made me like, I don't know why my mind just keeps going back to attachments being like, I feel like an enemy almost of the infinite, because attachments to things is often we because we're operating out of a scarcity. We're attached to it looking like this because if it's not this, it can't be anything. Like, this is the only way it could turn out in our mind. So it's like a scarcity of opportunities, a scarcity of whatever. And it's like, yeah, I feel like attachments is linked to scarcity as well.
And you're making me think of damn, I've listened to a whole lot of Kwame Ture like speeches and like read a lot from and about him. But like at some point, if I'm not mistaken, he spoke on how the powers that be, the capitalists, the warmongers, the people that run these systems that we're encapsulated by, they don't just limit our physical resources. They provide us with a scarcity. I don't want to say scarcity mindset because it sounds like one of those LLC Twitter folks, but really like it limits. What I really want to say is that it limits our imagination, right? That's one of the most, I feel like, brutal assaults on us, is that our imagination is so restricted, right? Like, so to the point where we can't even imagine living in a world where everyone has housing, everyone has clothing, shelter, and healthcare and all of those things. Like, some people can't imagine that being a thing that everyone has, right? But like, why not?
Why not? And I feel like that's why, I don't know, but like, I've often heard like children being really close to God or children being really close to the infinite. It's like because their imaginations haven't been limited. God forbid yet, though. Like, it's like
Right.
like their imaginations haven't been limited at this point in their life, and so they're able to imagine these things. Like when we were young, we had all of these ideas. I want to be an astronaut. I'm on the moon. Like, right. What do you mean? And it's like all of it's possible and really living in the limitless. And yeah. And then, things, the powers that be, things happen, life happens, more things are tacked onto us, more life experiences kind of like threaten our imaginations.
Absolutely. And that's been confirmed to me so many times with my own kids, because it's like people think, just as an example, people think kids can't understand someone being trans. It's like, no, actually it's not difficult at all for them to understand it if you haven't already like implanted in them so firmly the gender binary. If you haven't already instilled that into them super firmly, then it's not very hard for them to understand the concept of like, oh yeah, some people are men or boys, some people are girls or women, and some people are
Yeah.
neither. Like some people exist beyond that. Some people are just they exist differently, right? And some people are they were told they were this, they were assigned this at one point, but they grew and they recognized like, oh, actually that's not the case. This is who I am. Like it's that's not
Yeah.
super complex for kids to understand if you haven't, again, like you said, if you haven't limited their imagination. I don't want to say imagination like in the sense that like, existing outside of the binary is an imaginary thing, because people will
Yeah.
take that,
Nah.
but I mean just
Yeah.
their ability to conceive of
Yeah.
this ideal, this framework.
Yeah, they're more open to it. They're more open to they're more receptive. I also feel like being in the infinite requires a certain level of receptivity, because in receptivity to change, a like receptivity to what is, knowing that what is will constantly be changing. It's constantly fluid and like adapting and stuff like that, because like a lot of things when we talk about LGBTQ plus rights is something that's relatively new. When we talk about the way technology is advancing and stuff like that, and there's a lot of people that are not receptive to what is. They're stuck and attached to what was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they can't rationalize in their minds of what's happening. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like,
No, I get what you
yeah.
mean. I get what you mean, and I think that you kind of said this. If I'm understanding, you kind of said like being receptive to change allows you to be more tapped into the infinite, and I think
Yeah.
that's true. I think that's very true. I think that the concept of being flexible and adaptable allows you to, see more angles, right? Right. They
Yeah.
say like intelligence is or skill is being able to hit the mark, right? Or intelligence is able to hit the mark or whatever, but genius is able to, yeah, see the mark that no one sees. They to be able to hit the mark that no one sees, or something along those lines, right? And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's because like people who are able to tap into the concept of genius, right, and which I think isn't necessarily a thing you call a person, it's something that you call the actions or the habits of that person, right? Or even like that moment, like in a moment you could tap into something, tap into the idea of genius, right? And then you might not tap into it no more that day or that month or that week or whatever. But whatever, my point is like I think that people are able to tap into that concept of genius because of their receptivity to, changing information, changing situations in life.
Yeah. Yeah. They're willing to, yeah. Yeah. Willing, receptive, non attached, imaginative. Like, person is tapped into the infinite.
Okay, so I think we might be nearing, kind of where we can wrap things up a bit. Um, but I guess first off, I want to say like I really have been enjoying this conversation. I'm glad we had it or are having it and all of that. Um, and looking forward to just chatting with you more. I mean, we've had a good amount of conversations, but I'm looking forward to more. Um, but I guess the one thing I want to begin to close with is like if you had to, because we spent a lot of words, we've said a lot of words, we've said a lot of things talking about the infinite, but if you had to describe infinity in the simplest way you can you can to someone, how would you attempt to do that? Like, what might you say in this moment? Like, yo, what's infinity? What's that? Like, imagine it's like a 5-year old asking, like, infinity, what's that?
If I had to describe it, only sentences are coming to me. So the first one that came to me is I am.
Mm.
Like, I am. You want to know what infinite is? I am. No period.
No
Like, um,
period.
and then everything all at once.
Okay.
Because I don't really feel like the infinite is something to be discovered. And so it's such a simple answer. But me saying that to a 5-year-old or a 30-year-old, they're going to be like,
Right. Like,
what do
what do you mean? What do you mean by
you mean by
that?
that? And I'm going to be like, I am.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. 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 Now I think that a lot of times the jewels they kind of reveal themselves over time. Like you might not get it the first time you hear it, but over time, if you keep it with you, if you ponder it for long enough, you might see the value and the worth there.
Yeah.
So I guess if I was to answer the same question, if I'm explaining it to a 5-year old, I would say, yeah, I would probably try to impart upon them the feeling, because that way I feel like you can kind of tap into it and kind of intellectualize it later. But if you know the feeling, then you can go to it easier. But what I would probably say is think about think about if you were that thing, and I just point to whatever. Think about if you were that table. Think about if you were that chair. Think about if you were that dog, and you're that house. You're that bird. You're that air. And you're that water.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what that feels like. What does that feel like to you?
Mm.
And I would bet that that's infinity.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, let's get a
I'm like,
vibe.
I'm like, I'm gonna write this down for when I have kids.
Yeah, and I'm like, depending on the kid, they might be like, I don't get it. I don't understand, and they might not get it. But again, I think that the infinite, when you think about the universe as infinite, is ever expanding. I think that the best kind of phrases are the ones that get the point across simply and concisely. But then
Mm-hmm.
probably the second best phrases, or second best like things you can say to people, are the things that keep evolving. Their understanding of it can keep evolving over time. Like
Mm-hmm.
it works as like a seed that grows over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. And the
Hmm.
feeling is definitely, yeah, that's a key. That's key because I felt it, but didn't have words for it.
Yeah. Hmm.
So yeah,
And
that's key.
that's my saving grace. You feel me? I'm a Scorpio, man. I got hella Scorpio, Scorpio stellium. All I know is vibes. Now I got the vibes. Now I try to give words to it, but I got hella vibes way before I got the words for it.
Yep, that is a Scorpio.
Yeah. But yeah, Joaquin, it's been great chatting with you. I'm glad we took the time to do so, and yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, see, we right at the end of our time too. There we go. But yeah, I'm glad we've been able to do that, and yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has definitely piqued my brain. Thank
Come
you.
on. Come on, brain. Come on. Come on, intelligence. But all right.